In the second part of this lecture, let us discuss how we can use ecological modernization theory to understand social reality or to understand social transformation. So let us discuss how ecological modernization can be used as a prospective social theory. Like we discussed in the previous classes, the treadmill production theory is grounded in neo-Marxist and the neo-Weberian school of thought. Ecological modernization theory similarly also to be grounded in a larger sociological debate or larger theoretical debate. So when we see ecological modernization theory as a perspective to understand social transformation, we see that ecological modernization at a theoretical level comes very close to Ulrich Beck's theory of risk society and Beck's theory of reflexive modernization. In the next class, we will have a detailed discussion about Beck's concept of risk society and his concepts of reflexive modernization. And today, let us discuss that what are the similarities between ecological modernization theory and that of the risk society thesis or that of the reflexive modernization theory advocated by Ulrich Beck and Anthony Giddens. Both ecological modernization theory and the risk society thesis and the reflexive modernization theory, they all suggest that modernization can be turned back onto itself in order to address the problems which it has itself created. In other words, ecological modernization theory considers that if it is the modernization which has created these ecological problems, their solution lies also in the modernization itself. And in that sense, what is required is transformation of the society to a stage of ecological modernity where the modernization process becomes more reflexive. The modernization process becomes more reflexive in the sense that the modern institutions or the modern central institutions of the modern society should be ready to tackle these problems, should be ready to deal these problems starting from the design stage itself. In that sense, that is the reflexivity of the ecological modernization society, or that is the reflexive of the reflexivity of the advanced modern society, is that modern societies can bend back or modern societies can turn back to solve the problems which itself it has created. So in that sense, ecological modernization becomes much closer to the reflexive modernization theory, and both ecological modernization and reflexive modernization share the belief that society or a modern society or advanced modern society has to be more reflexive. And again, there also we may find a distinction between industrial modernity and ecological modernity, or in simple industrial modernity, while the state was more strong or the state was it was a strong state in ecological modernization theory, the state becomes a reflexive state in the sense that the state is ready to negotiate with the private sector, the state is ready to negotiate with the civil society, and the state is ready to take decisions collectively. In that sense, the state has become more reflexive to accommodate the interest of private, to accommodate the civil society, the NGOs in the process of decision making. The state is not as strong as it was in the advanced as it was in the industrial modernity. In ecological modernity, the state policy making becomes more reflexive, where it takes into consideration, where it accommodates interest of different players. So in that sense, policy making doesn't remain as a prerogative of the state, rather policy making becomes a joint activity, collective activity. Secondly, both ecological modernization and reflexive modernization share the skepticism towards radical environmentalism, in the sense that, like we have discussed in the previous theory, in the treadmill production theory, there is a great reliance on social movement. In fact, Alan Skenberg believed on the revolutionary potential of these environmental movement organizations, of the citizen collectives, that only through a collective mobilization environmental improvements can be brought forward. Treadmill production theory suggested that what is required to curb down pollution, what is required to minimize pollution, is a collective mobilization by social movement organizations. In that sense, I mean, being influenced by the neo-Marxism, treadmill production has a great reliance on revolutionary potential of these social movement organizations, environmental movement organizations, and citizens collective that require a collective mobilization by the citizens. Whereas ecological modernization theory doesn't emphasize on collective mobilization by the citizens, collective mobilization by the civil society organizations. Rather, it emphasizes on the process of governance which comes from the state perspective. So in that sense, ecological modernization is skeptical about the radical environmentalism, about the radical restructuring of the governance structure where the civil society or where the social movement plays an important role. In that sense, while the treadmill production theory emphasizes on collective mobilization by the social movements to put pressure on the state, ecological modernization argues, or ecological modernization proposes, a collaboration or a joint policy making, joint endeavor by the state and civil society to come out with an environmentally sound policy. So in that sense, ecological modernization, or in that sense, there is no place for revolt, there is no place for collective mobilization against the state. There is no need to put pressure on the state, because the state itself will come out with environmental sensitive policies in collaboration with the social movement. In that sense, social movement becomes insider of the state rather than outsiders of the state. Thirdly, both ecological modernization and reflexive modernization and Ulrich Beck risk society rely more on science, technology and innovation, whereas the previous theory that we discussed, the treadmill production theory, considers technology as the polluter, considers industry as the factor which produces pollution. Ecological modernization theory and reflexive modernization, both these theories consider technology, innovation and science as carriers of reform. They have a great role to play, because it is only through science, it is only through technology that we can find a solution to environmental problems. So therefore, science and technology is not evaluated because of their role in creating pollution, but they are regarded because of their role in reducing pollution. So ecological modernization theory and reflexive modernization theory both believe that science, technology and innovation have a great role to play in carrying forward the message of environmental improvement. They have a great role to play in reducing environmental pollution and to bring environmental reforms. So in that sense, ecological modernization theory departs itself, or ecological modernization theory makes a distance between the treadmill production theory, the Marxian approaches of understanding environmental change, and it shares more with the reflexive modernization, shares more with the risk society thesis that come from sociologists like Anthony Giddens and Ulrich Beck. Thirdly, both ecological modernization and reflexive modernization focuses more on transformation of the central institutions of modernity. So there is a difference here between ecological modernization and the Marxist oriented theories of the treadmill production. While both these theoretical schools demand certain kind of restructuring for ecological improvement or for environmental improvement, ecological modernization theory argues for changes in the central institutions of state, and where its focus is both on the public and the private. The focus is both on the state and the industry. So what basically it requires certain transformations in government and industry to overcome these ecological crises. To summarize, the basic point of this ecological modernization theory is that what is required to tackle environmental problem is certain reforms at the level of governance. We don't need a fundamental restructuring of the society, we don't need to change the production process, rather what is required is certain reforms in the production process, what is required certain reforms in the governance process, which can deal with these environmental problems. So ecological modernization therefore believes that with right kind of policies or with right kind of governance institutions or changes in the governance institutions, it is quite possible that we can solve the environmental problems. So while treadmill production theory argues that what is required is to change the production process, or what is required to address the production process, ecological modernization theory emphasizes on institutions of governance rather than production process itself. However, there are certain differences between ecological modernization as a social theory and that of reflexive modernization and the risk society thesis. Somehow there is a greater emphasis in Beck's reflexive modernization theory on the role played by new social movements or the role played by the sub-politics, whereas ecological modernization theory gives less importance to these movement organizations. Ulrich Beck, in his book Risk Society Towards a New Modernity, emphasizes that in the risk society thesis, or in the risk society where environmental problems emerges as risk, in these kind of situation, it is a sub-political structure or political structure which is beyond the formal organizations of the state that will play an important role. Perhaps that is a point where ecological modernization theory departs from that of the risk society thesis, because ecological modernization emphasizes more on state policies, emphasizes more on governance coming from the institutions of the state, whereas Beck has a great reliance on the sub-politics which is outside the formal organizations of political structure. So therefore, while for Beck it is political organizations outside the formal structures of the state which is important, ecological modernization theory emphasizes on formal institutions of state, formal institutions of governance, and their role in bringing ecological restructuring. Secondly, the second difference between these two theories is that Beck makes a clear-cut distinction between industrial modernity or industrial society and that of risk society, and Beck says that what characterizes risk society is reflexive modernization, that he makes a distinction between industrial modernization and reflexive modernization, and that distinction is very clear, that the society will transform from industrial modernity to that of a risk society, whereas ecological modernization believes that eco-efficiency can be achieved without a radical restructuring. Perhaps in an ecological modernization, the emphasis is again and again on the governance, emphasis is again and again on the role played by the state and the private. To summarize, we may say that ecological modernization relies more on policies coming from the formal institution of state rather than from the outside the formal institutions, or rather than outside political institutions. So probably these are the two important differences between ecological modernization theory and reflexive modernization theory. Otherwise, when we see the larger context of theorization in social science, or larger context of social theory, we see, or we realize that ecological modernization as a social theory, as a theory to understand social transformation, comes very close to Ulrich Beck's concept of risk society and to Anthony Giddings and Beck's concept of reflexive modernization, because ecological modernization is a stage in society, is a stage in societal evolution where the state and society becomes more and more reflexive. They have become more and more reflexive in the sense that the state and society are ready to turn back to solve the problems which they themselves have created. That it is the industrial society has created these problems, and therefore the society itself will turn back to solve these problems. So in that sense, it is the reflexivity, or it is the reflexive modernization which creates a bridge between the ecological modernization theory and the risk society thesis.